Welcome back to Rubbin Minds. Before the break, we looked at the ministerial list, in particular, the assignment of portfolios. Now we shift the conversation to the economy. Nigeria is Africa's biggest economy. And with some of the recent economical reforms, a lot of eyes are on the presidency to which way, when will Nigerians begin to get that sense of renewed hope and also reap the promised dividends of these reforms that have led to the devaluation of the naira, that have led to the removal of subsidy, amongst others. Now, to discuss the state of the economy and what should be done to make things move a whole lot faster and ensure that that multidimensional poverty that affects as many as 122 million Nigerians is reduced. Joining me on the show is Timi Olagunju, a policy analyst. Welcome to Rubbin Minds.
Thank you for having me.
And we also have Baba Ahmed Agbabiaka, a political analyst. Welcome to Rubbin Minds.
Thank you for having me, Sabina.
Now, I would like us to go straight into the conversation looking at the economy. Now, in the run-up to the elections, the major thing that a lot of the politicians came out to tell us is that they're going to work on the economy. And we're already beginning to see some economic reforms. Now, based on the economic reforms you've seen, does that spark in you that sense of renewed hope? Are you hopeful that you'll begin to see some of the promised dividends? I'll start with you, Timi.
Oh, well, evidence is the end of argument. And, you know, I remembered some years ago, I think 2005-06, when President Bola Ahmed Tinubu visited the University of Ibadan. I think I was in 300 level faculty of law. And he said that economic development is when the market woman on the street is able to feel that development in terms of the basic needs of life. But when you look at the evidence before us, that's not the case. You see that the National Bureau of Statistics recently released a result that showed the skyrocketing inflation, 22.22%. And interestingly, in that ranking, you find out that you see that in that ranking, the basic necessities of life take top priority. So number one, in terms of the general ranking, is that you see that over 11% thereabout goes to, you know, food and non-alcoholic beverages. And then next to that, interestingly, housing and other things around housing, that's electricity, gas, and all water and all that around housing. And then the third thing, which is the third basic necessity of life, according to Maslow's hierarchy, is shelter, food, clothing, right? That's clothing and footwear. Those are the three in terms of hierarchy, worst hit. And then you now come to the fourth, which is about around 1.5% thereabout, which is, interestingly, transportation. Then you have others. So when you look at it, in terms of economic reforms, right, you should expect that the evidence should guide the policy-making process of the presidency, considering the fact that this issue was further excavated by some of the economic policies and decisions of the president. For example, the announcement of the removal of subsidy, which many of his advisors have acclaimed that it was not part of what should have been in his speech, but he did that extemporaneously, you know. So those are core issues of concern that we need to look at. That's
okay. I'll let Baba Ahmed respond to that.
Well, okay, so I would like to be straight and very specific with some of these issues, extending from where he mentioned the issue of inflation. You know, I like comparing, I like having this argument or putting this argument forward that Nigeria does not exist in isolation. Now, we have our peculiarities, but there are some things that are just global. It's an argument that I've always stood on. In Egypt, I specifically mentioned Egypt because it's the third largest economy in Africa. Egypt has an inflation rate of about over 31%. Ghana, I specifically mentioned Ghana because they have a similitude of happenings, economy decisions and other with Nigeria, and it is an oil-producing nation. And Ghana is at over 52% inflation. Now, I don't want to go into the details of the specifics in the breakdown. So if you look at that, you want to now come into the decisions that have been taken by this president, by the new government that is just over 2 months old. From the beginning of the administration, where the president mentioned, like you said, the issue of removal of subsidy, those very genuine, very difficult but necessary decision pronouncement about the removal of fuel subsidy and the floating of the naira. Now, there's something that has happened also after that. It has shown, and that has shown the presidency or this government as being flexible and listening to the yearning of Nigeria.
So a government that is listening and flexible,
yes.
But how does that affect, to go back to what Timi said,
yes,
the market woman? How does that affect the number of Nigerians living in poverty? These reforms, how does that affect their day-to-day? This inflation, what's the effect of that? And does that give Nigerians a sense of renewed hope? Okay, so this is the flexibility I'm talking about. Recently, in the last couple of days, there has been changes or adjustment to some of these things, to some of these policies, especially the removal, the subsidy removal. We heard about the $3 billion Afro-Exim Bank loan, $3 billion Afro-Exim Bank loan by NNPC to ensure that we pay a cash loan for crude, limited number of crude that will be produced in future, just for immediate attention and bringing of so-called to some of these things, especially the fact that the crude oil, PMS price has skyrocketed and is also moving with the market forces. Market forces, especially the price of crude internationally. So that has been done to ensure that the price stays the way it is, and the president has reassured again and again that the price will not go beyond what it is. Also, the floating of the naira. We have seen what has happened with the floating of the naira when the dollar was already moving. Let's forget that these are issues that all of the presidential candidates, that the front runners also campaign about. There's no magic to it. But if a presidency or if a government comes with this flexibility or with this hard, courageous decision, and they are willing to listen, the president said there won't be subsidy, but there's a similitude of that. It's not called subsidy, but just to attend to immediate concerns. Then the long-term concern was the fact that the president said by December, one of the refineries is going to be fully functional, the Port Harcourt refinery, and some of the refineries, and that is a major silver bullet in ensuring that we phase out the issue of subsidy. So also in the floating of the naira, the same thing happened. So we saw the fact that the presidency came up with decisions that ensured that Bureau de Change, they are bringing back Bureau de Change, but with much more regulation now, unlike what it used to be before. So now... So you're speaking about the flexibility of the government and placing it as a government that listens. So yes, where they feel that, well, this economic reform is causing a bit of problems for Nigerians, they're yes, ready to maybe go back to the drawing table and do yes, things differently. Now, I'll move to you, Timi, and I want us to look at the issue of our debt profile, because a lot of Nigerians are saying, why do we keep on incurring debt? We keep on incurring this debt when there are other ways to maybe find, I'll say, to recharge the economy, maybe to look inwards so that we don't have to always go borrowing, which then means that a lot of the budget goes into debt servicing. So do you agree with some of these loans that are being taken? Is that the way forward, or what should be done?
Someone, a leader in one of the first world countries said something. He said, blessed are the, in quote, I will paraphrase it, blessed are the Nigerian youths, for they shall inherit the national debts. And so that brings to mind, that particular rhetoric brings to mind the reality that when you take debts, it's not just about the now, it's also about the future, the unborn children, your children, your grandchildren, being part of the partakers of the burden of that debt. And so it behoves that in itself, debt, it's not, every country in the world takes some kind of loan or some kind of, but then the point is, what is it used for? Then also, in pure economics, I'm a policy consultant and a lawyer, but, in economics, there's a common sense that talks about opportunity cost, right? When you look at the opportunity cost of some of these debts, as against all the alternatives, you might have cause to wonder. For example, alternative options around cost of reducing governance, has been mentioned severally. And it's not just about, when people talk about governance, it's not just about the president, the vice president, the minister, and the likes. Recently there was this talk about billions being given as, take home a package or severance package for the president and the vice president and others. But interestingly, people do not know that the president did not have more than, say, 12 million out of it, which means that the remaining billions went to a lot of aids. And so that's the challenge with Nigeria. We need to really start to redefine what governance is in terms of cost-benefit ratio. Is the bicameral legislature as we operate in, does it work for us? In terms of, look at the current appointment of ministers. I must commend that we did not have a lot of, ministers for states this time, unlike previous governments. But I had expected that was an opportunity to reduce the number of ministers, right? And then, because each minister and minister of state would usually have aides, but that's a very good development, that there were not a lot of ministers of states, but there were a lot of ministers. And which begs the question as to the cost of governance issue, which goes to a large extent to talk to the fact that, look, once we keep towing this line, the easy part, towards financing, rather than take the hard stance towards financing. History, those who forget history are doomed to repeat same. Right? You look at Singapore's of this world, they did not develop their country by just going and borrowing. They developed by looking inwards and ensuring that, charity begins at home. And so I think that's some key area to look at, in terms of cost of governance, beyond just borrowing and all that. Yes.
Baba Ahmed, you are nodding your head. Are you in agreement that we should look inwards towards recharging the economy, and we should also reduce the cost of governance?
Yes, I totally agree with the fact that we need to reduce the cost of governance and that we need to look inwards. Now, let me just address this very important issue. You see, just like he mentioned, governance is not just about that person. It has a lot to do with decisions. Now, one of the major decisions that this government has taken, so the three of them, first one is the subsidy issue, floating of Naira, and this other one, the last one and the most important one of the very important one is the appointment of ministers. Now, there is this narrative I would like to present about the fact that looking inward has to do with manufacturing and producing what we eat, what we use, and a whole lot. And a chunk of that has to do with agriculture, agri-commodity, and the value chain of agriculture itself. A whole lot of our people, he mentioned market women the other time, let me extend it to farmers. A substantive percentage of our farmers here are peasant farmers that farm to consume and perhaps sell parts. Now, most of them are in the northern state. They are everywhere, scattered even in the south and everywhere. And so, but there's the issue of security, insecurity. Most of them have been unable to go to farms, and those of them that go to farms end up selling their goods or commodities as much as 3 times the way the amount is supposed to be, because bandits and criminals tax them unofficially for them to harvest, for them to plant, for them to harvest. Now, one very important issue that I'm trying to drive in at is the issue of the appointment of the Minister of Defense. For the first time since 1999, we never had the issue of we've been having generals, retired generals as defense minister. For the first time, we're having a civilian. And everybody would be like, wow, what's happening? Why would a governor that has never carried a gun, that doesn't even know combat, be appointed as minister? Now, there's something unique about that. And referring to the Singaporean experience that he talked about, an elder statesman in Singapore made mention of the fact that they applied the acronym MPH in the development and growth of Singapore. And that is M for meritocracy, pragmatism, and honesty. There's pragmatism and meritocracy in the appointment of the current Minister of Defense, the Minister designate, Mohammed Badaru Abubakar. Now, he has never been in the military, but he's holding this. In the entire northern state, Jigawa State for 8 years never had the issue of banditry. Agriculture has been going on, despite the fact that all the surroundings, say Sokoto, Katsina, Kaduna, Zamfara, all of them have been bedeviled with banditry. But this didn't happen. Why didn't that happen? And why would this president now appoint a minister and a minister of state that does not have military background? Now, it boils to the fact that they were able, the minister, Badar, was able to ensure that that state was made peaceful, agricultural activities were going on. There was empowerment of youth. You know, this, when we talk about military, just like we're doing in the issue of Niger Republic, we're talking about carrot and stick. There's a lot of carrot that needs to be done. We have a lot of Tucano jets and all that military hardware. But
so
we need to apply. So this approach now has to do with the fact that we need somebody that has that experience and exposure that can, for a fact, he was chairman of the Presidential Fertilizer Initiative. So somebody that has been in the agricultural sector, that has been governor, that secured the state, there's a need to come and replicate that at the center, at the federal level. And that is what I believe the president has seen in him. So that departure is one of the ways that I feel this government is trying to address the issue of enough of agriculture and looking inwards to produce what we eat and reduce the cost, the forex that we spend in importing what we can produce here.
Timmy, I would like you to weigh in on your policy experience and to also touch on the role of agriculture and maybe other natural and human resources, because we have the issue of Japa, which is the migration of a lot of Nigerians to the United Kingdom, to Canada, to even Australia and so many other countries. So what kind of policies should this government be putting in place beyond some of the ones we've discussed already to supercharge the economy?
The word supercharge almost gets me, you know, worried in the sense of the fact that, you know, common sense is really not common sense, which is the fact that, you know, you talked about the military. And I would want to give a practical example, you know, the policy direction that the president had taken needs to be rejigged. And I say this in the sense of the fact that, you see, some of the policies that were taken, for example, policies around, you know, floating of the Naira and around the CBN, and even policies around, you know, what's it called, subsidy removal, are policies that could have been taken in the consensus of a council. Because, you see, conversation enriches the understanding. When the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Trade and Investment brings their head together, and then you're able to consider the different angles, you know, into shaping policy making, because there's something called the policy environment. And so the fact that such monumental policy decisions were taken by the president without a council, a federal executive, FEC, goes to show to a large extent whether these particular ministers would really have a say, or they would just be a dot on the cake in that sense. And that's a core challenge, you know. That's a very core challenge, because some of those policies, when you look at them, for example, the military, right? There was the 2023 budget for the military was about 1.3 trillion naira. And as at the time when it was at that rate, right, certain procurements and contracts had been made. And
so we need to see the president not working in isolation, but working with his ministers, working with his cabinet.
Precisely.
So that
that's the first.
Unfortunately, we'll have to bring this conversation to an end. But we say thank you, Timi Olagunju, a policy analyst, for your contributions on Rubbin Minds. And thank you again, Baba Ahmed Agbabiaka, a political analyst.